I came home early and watched my wife shove a man into our bedroom closet like I was the one who didn't belong there. I didn't yell. I didn't ask questions. I just walked over, turned the key and locked him inside. My hands were steady. That's the part one remember most. Not the look on Helen's face. Not the way the closet door rattled once then went still. Just my hands, calm like I was locking up the front door at the end of a normal day. But my chest? That was a different story. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears like a truck idling too close to my head. Helen stood there in the middle of the bedroom, frozen, her mouth opening and closing like she'd forgotten how to breathe. She looked smaller somehow. Not scared, exactly, more like she'd been caught off script and didn't know the next line. "Jack," she said finally, her voice thin and shaky. "This isn't what you think." I held up a hand. Not angry, just firm. "Don't," I said. "Just don't say a word." I stepped past her, out into the hallway and grabbed my phone from the kitchen counter. My thumb hovered for a second, then I typed out a message. "Can you come by? We need to talk. It's important." I sent it to her parents. Arthur and Martha lived 20 minutes away in the suburbs. Close enough for what I had in mind. When I walked back into the bedroom, Helen hadn't moved much. She was turned slightly toward the closet, like she could somehow make it disappear if she stared hard enough. "You locked it?" she asked, her voice a whisper. I nodded. "Why would you do that, Jack? Just open it." I leaned against the dresser, arms folded over my chest. "Because I'd like everyone to be here when that door opens." Her eyes flickered just for a second. Not confusion, calculation. That was the moment something inside me shifted. See, I'd been married to Helen for 28 years. You don't get that far without learning a person's tells. The way they pause before answering. The way they look when they're about to lie versus when they're just trying to spare your feelings. This wasn't either of those. This was her trying to find a way out of a corner. "I can explain everything," she said. "I'm sure you can," I replied. "But you can wait." We stood there in silence for a while after that. The house felt different, like the air had suddenly gotten heavy. From the hallway, I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator. The AC kicked on, pushing cool air through the vents. Ordinary sounds, the kind you don't notice until everything else goes quiet. I walked out to the living room and sat down in my usual chair. The leather creaked under me. I reached over and adjusted the thermostat out of habit, 2 degrees down. I always did that when I got home early. Helen followed me out a minute later. She hovered near the doorway like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to come all the way into the room anymore. "You're overreacting," she said, but there wasn't much weight behind it. She sounded like she was trying to convince herself more than me. I looked at her, really looked this time. Her hair was a little off. Not messy, just rushed, like she tried to smooth it down with her hands a second before I walked in. There was a faint smell of cologne in the air, something sharp and expensive that I didn't own. And then there were the boots sitting by the edge of the bed, half hidden by the frame. Work boots, dark leather, barely worn. I'd seen them the second I walked in. Size 11, I guessed. I'm a 10.5. "Who is he?" I asked. She hesitated just a beat too long. "A friend," she said. I let out a quiet breath through my nose. "You don't hide friends in closets, Helen. Not unless you're 5 years old playing a game." She crossed her arms, defensive now. "You came home early." I panicked. I didn't want a scene. "Yeah," I said. "I noticed." Another silent stretch between us. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. For a second, I waited for the anger to show up. I figured it had to be there somewhere. I'd been working my tail off for nearly 30 years to build this life, and now this was happening in the house I paid for. What came instead was something colder, clearer. Like looking at a map after you've been driving in circles for hours and suddenly realizing you're on the wrong road entirely. "You know what's strange?" I said. She didn't answer. I kept expecting to feel like I wanted to break something. Burn the house down. But all I feel is like I finally woke up. Her expression shifted just slightly. That flicker again. From the bedroom, the closet door made a soft sound, not a knock, more like a shift of weight. A man trying to get comfortable in a dark, cramped space. I didn't turn to look. "Sit down," I said, nodding toward the couch. She didn't move. "Helen," I added, a little firmer this time. "Sit down." Slowly, she walked over and sat on the edge of the cushion, her hands clasped tight in her lap. I checked my phone. No response yet, but it had only been a couple of minutes. "They don't need to be involved," she said quietly. "This is between us, Jack. Please, let's just talk." I shook my head. "Not anymore. It stopped being just between us the second you put him in that room." I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a second, and that's when it hit me. Not the affair, not even the man in the closet. Something else. A feeling I'd had a few weeks ago, sitting in my office at the warehouse, staring at numbers that didn't quite add up. I brushed it off at the time. Told myself I was just tired or the economy was shifting. Now, sitting here in my own living room with a stranger locked in my closet, that feeling came back, stronger and clearer than ever. I opened my eyes and looked at Helen. This didn't just happen today, did it? I said. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't say a word. No, I went on slowly. This has been going on for a long time. She didn't deny it. That told me more than a confession ever could. From somewhere down the street, I heard the low rumble of a truck passing by. For a second, my mind drifted to the yard, to the drivers, the schedules, all the moving parts of the business I trusted her to help me run. All the things I hadn't looked at too closely lately because I thought she had my back. I stood up and walked toward the window, glancing out at the quiet Philadelphia street. Late afternoon light, long shadows on the pavement. Everything looked normal, but the whole world had shifted 3 inches to the left. Behind me, Helen spoke again, softer this time. Please, Jack. Unlock the door. This is cruel. I didn't turn around. Cruel? No, Helen. Cruel is letting me believe everything was fine for years while you were doing whatever this is. Not yet, I said. He stays in there. Because by then I was starting to understand something. Whatever was behind that door, it wasn't just a mistake or a one-time thing. It was a symptom of something much bigger. And whatever was coming next, I wanted people to see it. I didn't want her to be able to twist the story later. Before that day, I would have told you I knew every corner of my house. Every squeaky board in the hallway, every loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen, every window that stuck when the Philly humidity rolled in. But that afternoon, sitting in my own living room with my wife on the couch and a man locked in our bedroom closet, the place felt foreign to me. Like I'd walked into a movie set of my own life by mistake. Helen kept glancing toward the hallway. I noticed every time. She tried to make it subtle, but after 28 years, I knew her better than she knew herself. Her left hand kept worrying the edge of her sweater, pulling at a loose thread. Her right foot tapped once, then stopped when she realized I was watching her. Jack, she said, keeping her voice low, almost a whisper. You're making this worse than it has to be. Let him go and we can deal with this. I looked at her. I didn't put him in there, Helen. You did. Her face flushed red. That's not what I meant and you know it. I know exactly what you meant. She swallowed hard and looked down at her hands. For a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Not because she deserved it, but because old habits are hard to kill. When you've spent nearly 3 decades watching someone carry groceries, fight the flu, and laugh at the same dumb jokes, your heart doesn't just stop recognizing them because they did something terrible. That was the hard part. Part of me still saw the woman I married. The other part saw someone who had shoved a grown man into our closet and expected me to act like I was the one being difficult. My phone buzzed. It was Martha. We're on our way. Be there in 10. I didn't answer. I just set the phone face down on the side table. Helen saw the screen light up. They're coming? She asked, her voice cracking. Yes. Her eyes widened, and for the first time she looked genuinely panicked. You had no right to bring them into this. It's our marriage. That almost made me laugh out loud. No right. I said. That's where you want to start? With my rights. She stood up, pacing back and forth. This is humiliating. I won't stay here for this. I looked at her for a long second. I agree. It is humiliating. For both of us. The words landed heavier than I expected. She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. From the bedroom there was another sound. A faint knock this time. Not a rattle, but a deliberate, careful knock. Helen turned toward it immediately. There it was again, that look on her face. Not embarrassment, not fear of her parents seeing her like this, but coordination. Like she was worried he might say the wrong thing before she had a chance to fix the situation. I stood up. Sit down, I said. She didn't move. Helen, sit down. I walked past her down the hallway. The carpet felt soft under my shoes, which somehow made the whole thing feel even more surreal. There was nothing dramatic about it, no shouting, no broken glass, just a man walking down his own hallway to open his own bedroom closet. I stopped outside the door and listened. I could hear him breathing on the other side. Back up, I said to the wood. I didn't get an answer. I turned the key. The lock clicked open. Behind me, Helen made a small, stifled sound like she wanted to stop me but couldn't move. I pulled the door open. A man stepped out, smoothing the front of his shirt like he'd just walked out of a meeting instead of my wife's closet. He was younger than me, maybe late 30s. Dark hair, a trim beard, clean jeans and a dark work jacket. The kind of guy who tried to look rugged but spent too much time on his hair. And I knew him. Not well, but I knew his face. Ethan Cross, I said. His eyes moved from me to Helen then back again. That was all I needed to see. Ethan Cross had done dispatch work for my company on and off for nearly a year. He was an independent contractor, someone who handled the broker contacts and driver schedules when things got busy. Helen had pushed for him hard at the start. He's efficient, she'd said. And we really need the extra hand. I had trusted her. Looking back, that was the biggest mistake of my life. Ethan cleared his throat, trying to look me in the eye. Jack, oh look, I know how this looks. I cut him off. You've got two choices, I said, my voice dead flat. You walk into that living room and you sit down, or I call the cops and tell them I caught a burglar in my bedroom. I've got cameras on the porch, Ethan. I can prove you broke in while I was out. His jaw tightened. He knew I was lying about the breaking in part, but he also knew a police report would ruin his reputation in the city. Helen stepped forward, reaching for his arm. That's not necessary, Jack. I didn't even look at her. I kept my eyes on him. Sit. For a second I thought Ethan might try to play the tough guy. He had that look about him. But then he looked past me at Helen, saw the look on her face, and he walked into the living room and sat. We all ended up in there like some messed up family meeting. Ethan took the armchair near the window. Helen sat on the edge of the couch again, but this time she didn't sit near him. Too obvious, I guess. I stayed standing, leaning against the wall. Nobody spoke. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. Ethan kept rubbing his palms on his jeans. Helen stared at the floor. I looked from one to the other. It's strange what you notice when you stop reacting and start watching. The way Ethan kept checking his phone without unlocking it. The way Helen's eyes darted toward him every time I shifted my weight. The way neither of them asked what I actually knew. Finally, Ethan said, "This is a personal matter, Jack. We should talk about this later." I turned to him slowly. "You were in my house," I said. "In my bedroom, in my closet. There is no later." His mouth pressed into a thin line. Helen whispered, "Jack, please don't do this to me." I looked at her. "Do what?" "Tell the truth." She didn't answer. The doorbell rang. Helen flinched like she'd been slapped. I walked to the front door and opened it. Arthur and Martha stood there. Arthur was 76, a retired post office worker, still wearing a tucked-in shirt and that old-school discipline. Martha was smaller, with eyes that could see right through you. Martha looked at me and knew immediately. "Jack," she said, her voice full of worry. I stepped aside. "Come in." They walked in slowly. Arthur saw Ethan sitting in the chair and stopped dead. His eyes went from the stranger to his daughter, then back to me. Martha put a hand to her chest. "Who is this man?" she asked. Nobody answered. I closed the door. Helen stood up, her face wet with tears. "Mom, Dad, I can explain everything." Arthur didn't move. He just looked at his daughter with a look I'll never forget. "Helen," he said, his voice low and heavy, "why is there a man sitting in your living room looking like he just got caught with his hand in the till?" I pointed toward the couch. "Everybody sit down. We have a lot to talk about." Martha looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. "Jack, what happened?" I looked at Helen, then at Ethan. "I came home early," I said, "and I found out that the man in my closet hasn't just been in my house. He's been in my business too." The silence in the room was so thick you could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Arthur and Martha sat on the love seat, side by side, looking like they were at a funeral. Helen was still on the edge of the couch, vibrating with nervous energy, and Ethan just looked like he wanted to bolt for the door. "Jack," Arthur said, his voice gravelly, "what do you mean he's been in the business?" I didn't answer right away. I walked over to the sideboard and picked up a manila folder I'd brought in from the truck. I hadn't just come home early because I felt like it. I'd been up until 3 in the morning at the warehouse office, printing out dispatch logs and bank statements. I dropped the folder on the coffee table. The sound it made, a heavy thud, made Helen jump. "For the last 6 months, our overhead has been climbing," I said, looking at Arthur but pointing at Ethan. "Small stuff at first. Fuel surcharges that didn't match the mileage. Broker fees for emergency hauls that I never authorized. I thought we were just having a rough patch with the Philly port delays." I opened the folder and slid a spreadsheet across the table toward Martha. She didn't want to look, but she did. "Then I started seeing a name pop up on the third-party payouts," I continued. "A shell company called EC Logistics. I asked Helen about it last month. She told me it was a new subcontractor Ethan was using to help us clear the backlog in Jersey." I looked at Helen. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She was staring at a spot on the carpet like it was the most interesting thing in the world. But here's the kicker, I said. I called the Jersey yard yesterday. They've never heard of EC Logistics. Those loads? They were never moved by a sub. They were moved by our own drivers on our own fuel, but the broker fee was still being paid out to an account that Helen has access to. Ethan finally spoke up. Jack, that was a misunderstanding of the contract terms. I can explain the billing. Shut up, Ethan, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. You weren't just sleeping with my wife. You were helping her bleed the company I spent 30 years building. You were taking money out of the pockets of drivers who've been with me since you were in high school. Arthur stood up. He wasn't a big man, but he had that old-school posture that made him look like a wall. He looked at Ethan, then he looked at his daughter. Is this true, Helen? Arthur asked. Did you steal from Jack? I didn't steal. Helen snapped, her voice finally breaking into a full-on sob. I was making sure we had something for ourselves. You don't know what it's like, Dad. He's always at the yard. He's always thinking about the trucks. I wanted something that was mine. By taking what was his? Martha whispered, her voice trembling. Helen, how could you? He didn't even notice. Helen screamed, pointing a finger at me. I did it for months and he didn't even notice because all he cares about is the business. Ethan actually listened to me. He actually saw me. I just watched her. It was like watching a stranger. This woman had sat across from me at dinner every night, asked me how my day was, helped me plan the company Christmas party, and all the while she was funneling money into a side account with a guy she was hiding in our closet. I noticed, Helen, I said quietly. I noticed the numbers were off. I just didn't want to believe it was you. Ethan stood up then. He looked at the door. Look, I'm leaving. This is family stuff. Jack, you want to talk business? Call my lawyer. I stepped in his way. I'm not a giant, but I've spent my life hauling freight and moving crates. I'm solid. You're not going anywhere yet. You gonna hit me? Ethan sneered, trying to find his spine now that the parents were watching. Go ahead. Make it easy for me to sue you. I'm not gonna hit you, I said. I'm gonna wait for the police. Because I already called them before your in-laws got here. I reported a corporate embezzlement. They should be turning into the driveway any second. The blood drained out of Ethan's face so fast I thought he might faint. He looked at Helen, but she was buried in her hands, wailing. The managing was over. The coordination was gone. It was just a room full of people realizing their lives had just imploded. Sure enough, blue and red lights started bouncing off the living room walls. The Philly PD doesn't move fast for everything, but when you tell them you have a guy held at the scene for a high-value theft and you've got the paperwork to prove it, they show up. The next hour was a blur. 2 officers came in. They were professional, bored, and thorough. I handed them the folder. I showed them the closet. I showed them the boots. They took Ethan outside in handcuffs. He didn't look rugged or polished anymore. He looked like a kid who'd been caught breaking a window. When the door finally closed and it was just me, Helen, and her parents, the silence came back. But it was worse this time. It felt like the house was empty even with 4 people in it. Arthur walked over to me and put a hand on my shoulder. His hand was shaking. Jack, I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault, Art, I said. And I meant it. They were good people. They didn't deserve a daughter who would do this. We'll take her with us tonight, Martha said, her face pale. She went over to Helen and helped her up. Helen didn't fight it. She looked like she'd had the bones taken out of her. She didn't look at me as they walked toward the door. Right before they left, Arthur turned back. What are you going to do, Jack? I looked around the living room. The furniture we picked out together. The photos on the mantel. The house I'd worked 18-hour shifts to pay off. I'm going to go to the yard, I said. I've got a 5 a.m. dispatch to check, and I need to figure out how much of my company is left. They left. I heard their car pull away. I stood in the foyer for a long time just listening to the house. It was quiet. No more rattling closet doors. No more whispers. I went into the bedroom. The closet door was still wide open. I saw his shirt, he dropped it in the panic. A cheap, designer button-down. I picked it up, walked to the trash can in the kitchen and shoved it down to the bottom. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and my laptop. I went through every single transaction from the last year. Every cent. By the time the sun started to come up over the Philly skyline, I knew the damage was bad. Not enough to kill the company, but enough to hurt. But as I sat there watching the light hit the trees in the backyard, I didn't feel broken. I felt clean. like a fever had finally broken. I picked up my keys and walked out to my truck. The air was crisp, that early morning Philly chill that makes you feel alive. I started the engine, backed out of the driveway, and didn't look back at the house. I had work to do. And for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly who I was doing it for. The sun was just a thin, bruised line of purple and orange over the Philadelphia skyline when I pulled into the yard. The Jack & Sons Logistics sign was humming, that old neon flicker I'd been meaning to fix for 3 years. Usually that sound irritated me, it was a reminder of a small job left undone. This morning it sounded like a heartbeat. A steady, rhythmic reminder that despite everything that had happened in my bedroom 24 hours ago, the world was still turning, and my business was still breathing. I sat in the cab of my truck for a long time just watching the gate. It was 4:45 a.m. The first wave of drivers was starting to roll in. These were men I'd known for decades. Men with calloused hands, stained hats, and thermoses full of black coffee. They were the backbone of everything I owned, the ones who kept the wheels turning while I was at home, sleeping in a bed that had become a crime scene. They didn't know that the woman who sent them handwritten Christmas cards every year had been skimming their fuel tabs. They didn't know that the guy they'd been taking orders from in dispatch was currently sitting in a holding cell on 8th and Race, waiting for a bail hearing. I stepped out of the truck and the cold Philly air hit me like a physical blow. It felt good. It felt real. It stripped away the last of that foggy shell-shocked feeling I'd been carrying since I turned the key in that closet lock. I walked straight to the office. The smell of stale coffee and diesel was everywhere, baked into the walls. I sat down at my desk, not the fancy mahogany one Helen had picked out for the house, but the scarred oak one with the coffee rings and the stacks of bills of lading. I opened my laptop and started the real work. The cleanup work. The first thing I did was fire Ethan Cross. Technically, he was an independent contractor, so it was just a matter of revoking his access codes and sending a formal notice of termination for cause to his lawyer. Typing his name felt like scraping mud off my boots. I deleted his profile from the dispatch system, watching his name vanish from the digital grid. One click and he was gone. If only the rest of it were that easy. Then came the hard part. I called my head mechanic, Miller. He'd been with me since I had 2 trucks and a prayer. He was the kind of guy who could tell what was wrong with an engine just by listening to it idle from 50 yards away. Miller, I said when he picked up, I need a full audit on the fuel logs for the last 6 months. Every gallon, every stop. If the mileage doesn't match the pump receipt, I want a red flag on it. No exceptions. Everything okay, Jack? He asked, his voice thick with sleep and confusion. You sound different. Harder. Just cleaning house, Miller. I'll be in the office all day. See you at 6. By midday, the office was a war zone of paperwork. I had the company CPA Linda in there with me. She was a sharp woman, mid-50s, who didn't miss a decimal point and didn't care for small talk. As she went through the EC Logistics invoices I'd pulled, her face went from professional calm to pure, unadulterated disgust. Jack, she said, leaning back and rubbing her temples. She wasn't just taking a little off the top. This wasn't a mistake. They were billing for deadhead miles that never happened. They were creating fake maintenance reports for trailers that were sitting in the back lot for repairs. It's systematic. It's a betrayal of the highest order. How much, Linda? I asked. I didn't want the play-by-play. I didn't want to hear about the why or the how. I just wanted the number. The cold, hard damage. Over the last 8 months? Roughly $180,000, she said, sliding a spreadsheet toward me. I looked out the window at the yard. $180,000. That was 2 brand new rigs. That was the year-end bonuses for my senior drivers who had worked through the holidays. That was the college fund for my nephew. It was a king's ransom, built out of lies told over the dinner table. Can we get it back? I asked. From him? Maybe through a civil suit, if he hasn't spent it on that designer watch he wears, Linda said. From Helen? That's between you and your divorce lawyer, Jack. In this state, assets are marital, but theft is still theft. You've got a mountain of evidence here. If you want to burn her down, you've got the fuel. I didn't answer. I didn't want to burn her down. I just wanted the poison out of the system. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers and crushing silence. I didn't go back to the house for 10 days straight. I slept on the old cot in the back of the warehouse office. It was uncomfortable, the spring poked into my back and the sound of the highway was constant, but it was honest. There were no ghosts there. No smells of expensive perfume or the memory of a closet door being slammed shut in a panic. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of air brakes and diesel engines, and it reminded me that I still had a world to run. Helen called me dozens of times. I didn't pick up once. She sent emails. At first they were apologetic, full of "I was lonely, and you were always at the yard, and you don't understand the pressure I was under." Then when I didn't bite they turned sharp. They became venomous. "You're trying to ruin me," she wrote. "You're acting like a dictator. I helped build that company too. I deserve my share." I replied once. Just one sentence, sent at 3 in the morning. "You didn't build it, Helen. You just learned how to tear it down without making a sound." She stopped emailing after that. The legal side moved like a slow-moving freight train, heavy and unstoppable. Ethan tried to cut a deal almost immediately, pointing the finger at Helen, saying she was the mastermind, and he was just a consultant following her lead. Helen's lawyer tried to argue it was a misunderstanding of consultancy fees and performance bonuses. But the paper trail I'd found that night was too clean. I'd spent 28 years making sure my books were perfect, and that same precision was what was finally cutting them both to pieces. One evening, about a month after that Saturday, I finally went back to the house to gather the rest of my things. It was empty. Her parents had come and taken the rest of her stuff. The place felt echoing and hollow like a warehouse after a fire. The structure was still there, but the warmth was gone. I walked into the bedroom. The closet door was wide open now. I stood there looking at it for a long time. I thought I'd feel a surge of anger or maybe that hollow pit in my stomach again. But all I felt was exhaustion. I realized then that the secret wasn't just the man. The secret was that our whole life had become a series of closed doors. I'd been so busy looking at the road ahead, focusing on the next contract and the next expansion, that I hadn't noticed she'd been building a separate world right under my nose. I went back to the kitchen and made a sandwich. I sat at the table where we used to talk about our golden years, about retiring to the coast, about finally slowing down. I realized then that I didn't want to slow down anymore. The business was the only thing that hadn't lied to me. A truck either runs or it doesn't. A load is either delivered or it's late. There's a beauty in that kind of truth. It doesn't hide in closets. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. It was a surgical process, cold, efficient, and expensive. It cost me a massive chunk of the liquid cash I had saved, and I had to sell the big house in the suburbs. But I didn't care. I bought a small place closer to the yard, a brick row house in South Philly with a small garage and enough room for a bed and a desk. It was quiet and it was mine. I saw Helen one last time at the final signing. She looked different. The polish was gone. She looked like someone who had spent her whole life trying to manage an image and finally ran out of paint. She tried to speak to me in the hallway of the courthouse after the papers were stamped. "Jack," she said, her voice sounding small in the marble corridor. Do you think we could have fixed it? If you'd stayed home more? If we'd talked?" I looked at her. I didn't feel hate. I didn't even feel pity. I just felt finished. "The problem wasn't that I wasn't home, Helen," I said. "The problem was that even when I was there, you were already looking for a way out. You just didn't have the guts to tell me to my face." I walked away. I didn't look back to see if she was crying. It wasn't my job to check her gauges anymore. I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright, cold Philly sun. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Miller. "Jack, the new Kenworth just rolled into the yard. The guys are waiting for you to do the walk-around. They want to see the boss." I climbed into my truck and started the engine. I felt the vibration through the seat, the steady, reliable hum of a machine that worked because it was maintained. I shifted into gear and pulled out into traffic, heading back to the only place that felt like home. I spent the rest of the day in the yard, talking to the drivers, checking the loads, and making sure the Jack and Sons sign was finally fixed. It was glowing steady now, a solid, bright blue against the night sky. No flickering. No noise. Just a clear light. If you've ever been betrayed, you know that the world doesn't end. It just changes shape. You learn to see the cracks before they become breaks. You learn that some things can't be fixed, and that's okay. You just clear the wreckage and keep moving. I stood at the gate of the yard that night, watching the last truck of the shift pull out. The driver honked twice, a friendly "see you tomorrow" sound. I waved back. The company was still standing. My name was still on the door. And for the first time in 28 years, when I looked in the mirror, I knew exactly who was looking back. I'm Jack. I run a tight ship. I don't miss the small things anymore. And I don't lock doors I'm afraid to open. That's the thing about the long haul. It's not about how fast you go or how much you carry. It's about making sure that when you finally reach the end of the road, you're the one still behind the wheel, and you're the one holding the keys. I took a final sip of my coffee, turned off the yard lights, and went home. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It just felt like peace.